I'm gonna turn the recording on. Very short study. I thought somehow there was a study on the Berean Studies website directly related to the first and the last, but I don't
Oh,
see such a study. But I do see some related studies, and I posted the link, which I'll share with
hey
you
Dante,
guys. I'll share with you guys a bit
uh,
later. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you. Dante, check the link on the evil. You have a study on evil, which it's on the website, but I don't. When you click on the link, it doesn't go anywhere. So if you want, I just want to bring it to your attention. Maybe you want to fix that
Okay.
on the evil
It's
study of evil
okay. All right. I'll take a look at it. I'll see.
site.
It's probably yeah, yeah. The link is probably broken.
Dante, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
John 9:41. Can you read that
Oh,
and explain to me?
oh, I don't know if I can explain it, but let me go through the verses. Let's get the study out of the way, and then we'll open for short discussion. We'll come back to that. 9:40, you said?
Okay, no problem. That's okay.
All right, John 9
9 verse 41.
41. Okay. Yeah, so I thought I had a study on the first and the last, and I heard another study, and it just dawned on me how many people are interpreting some of these verses. So I wanted to make sure. I don't know if you've seen it. You've probably seen, the spiritual side to this. And I've labeled this study from the last unto the first. And it starts with the idea of receiving a penny, the laborers. Because the way people are understanding this is that they're thinking that, this is someone that is upset, a believer who's upset for not receiving, uh, for allowing those that are coming at the last minute, and then they're being labeled or they're being viewed as equal unto them. And the moment you think about that, you have to wonder, wait a minute, keep in mind that this is a parable. And anytime we try to relate that to a physical, a literal uh, interpretation of the Bible, then we're probably coming to the wrong conclusion. So in Matthew chapter 20, verse 2, when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Now, I'm just going to summarize at first that the penny, and we've looked at some studies before, the study called money, another study called First Estate, and another study called Last Plagues. These are the three studies, Lord willing, that I think you might find actually tie into this one. So the penny appears to be relating to Christ, appears to be relating to money, and ultimately, the judgment and salvation side of Christ. He sent them into the vineyard. Matthew 22, verse 19. Show me the tribute money, and they brought unto him a penny. So we see that God is equating penny with tribute and money, right? Matthew 18, verse 25. He saith, yes, and when he was come into the house, Jesus preventing him. Now, maybe you might be able to help me with this one. I'm not sure if I have the full understanding of this particular couple of verses, but we might be on the right track. Jesus prevented him, saying, what thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? In other words, who do they receive custom from, or who do they receive tribute? There was a verse when the disciples asked him about Caesar, the picture of Caesar on the penny. Remember that? So this also relates, but I don't have that verse here right now. So in verse 26, Matthew 18, Peter saith unto him, of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, then are the children free. In verse 27, notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea and cast an hook, and take up the fish that first come up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. Take that and give unto them from me and thee. So what I'm thinking these verses are talking about, pointing to Christ being the money, being the tribute. The question was raised, Are they taking tribute of strangers? And Peter said, yes, of strangers. So apparently we may not be allowed, or we're not supposed to take tribute of strangers, but of Christ, which is, it appears typifies here, is typified by the money. All right, so in verse 3 of Matthew 20, and when he went out the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said unto them, go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Now this is important, I think, because the first couple of verses are talking about the laborers being sent forth for a penny a day. That's the agreement. But you notice here how God is changing the language slightly, saying, whatsoever is right, I will give thee. And in verse 7, Matthew 20, they say unto him, because no men have hired us, he saith unto them, go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, excuse me, shall ye receive. Luke chapter 10, verse 35. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence. I think these would be pennies. 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. So you can see, the overall theme when we compare verse after verse in the Bible, we begin to see a pattern. Matthew 20, verse 10. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. Verse 11. And when they had received, they murmured against the good man of the house. Now, this, I think, is a very important clue, which proves, again, we can't just read the Bible on the surface, because our minds tend to formulate a conclusion right then and there. As I said, it appears that the way that most people are understanding this, they're looking at these laborers as all Christians, and then Christians are murmuring against Christ, because they're not receiving more than they should. All right, so Matthew 20, verse 11. When they had received, they murmured against the good man of the house. Now take a look at these related verses. Luke chapter 5, verse 30. But their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples. John 6:41. The Jews murmured at him, at Christ, because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. John 6:43. Jesus therefore answered and said unto them, murmur not among yourselves. John 6:61. When Jesus knew in himself that his disciples murmured at it, he said unto them, doth this offend you? And then 1 Corinthians 10:10. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Okay, so you see the context here. It appears for pretty much all the verses related to murmuring. It has to do with the unsaved church, Babylon. So then the next question is, well, why is the church, the unsaved church, involved, right? So in Matthew 20, verse 12, saying, these last have wrought about 1 hour. Remember the hour, the day and the hour? So the context appears to be the great tribulation, right? And the judgment that follows. These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. That in itself, it's not the language of working hard, but this appears to be the language of the church being under the wrath of God. Those that have borne the burden and the heat being Christ, the heat being fire. So they're not speaking in good terms, are they? They're not saying, okay, we're saved, but we should be receiving a bigger reward because you have this other category of people, and they've come to be, very recently, and now they're equal unto us. But are they really equal? Is God talking about salvation for both? No. No, and the idea of being equal, it goes back to the principle the Bible has, or is set forth, about the first and the last. And we're going to look at that in a few minutes. But in Matthew 20, verse 13, but he answered of them and said, friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? And then in Revelation 6, verse 6, a very difficult verse regarding, but the context appears to be that of judgment. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So can you see how Christ appears to be in view here? It's a language of judgment, the idea of a penny, uh, the money that's related to this period of time being Christ. And there's a judgment side to that as well as a salvation side. Now, before we look at the first and the last, which I think Lord willing is going to tie these verses into what we're looking at, we also need to understand the concept of reward. People seem to think, well, every time God is talking about a reward, he's talking about salvation. No. Revelation 22, verse 12, and behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. Isn't that interesting? Matthew 16, 27, for the Son of Man shall come in the glory of his Father with his angels. Let's see. With his angels, and then shall reward every man according to his works. Now he that planteth, 1 Corinthians 3:8, he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. Now there is also the recompense of reward, or the reward of unrighteousness. In Hebrews 2, verse 2, for if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward. 2 Peter 2:13, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, as they that counted pleasure to write in the daytime. So you can begin to see that the setting here is that this is the corporate church, the corporate body being sent into the world with a mandate to share the gospel. And the agreement is that they are going to receive Christ. They're going to receive a penny, one way or the other, right? One way or the other. Isaiah 3, verse 11, woe unto the wicked, it shall be ill with him, for the reward of his hands shall be given him. In Revelation 18, verse 6, reward her even as she rewarded you, double unto her according to her works. So what I'm saying here again is that it appears that this mandate is to the corporate body. But remember, the Bible also says many are called, but few are chosen. So now let's look at the first and the last. Notice here in Matthew 20, verse 8, so when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his servant, call the laborers and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. You think this is coincidental? Beginning from the last unto the first? No, because the Bible says the first shall be last and the last shall be first. In Matthew 20, verse 14, take that thine is and go thy way, I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Now again, the language of saying even as unto thee has a lot of people thinking that this is talking about the same category of people, elect believers. I don't think that that's in view at all. It's talking about the wheat and tares, right? Even as unto thee. Well, what are the tares receiving? They're receiving the wrath of God. They're also receiving a penny. Mark chapter 9, verse 35, and he sat down and called the 12 and saith unto them, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and servant of all. Matthew 19:30, but many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Genesis 48, verse 18, Joseph said unto his father, talking about Jacob and Esau, I believe, right? In this context, my father, for this is the firstborn. Isaac and Jacob, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't looked at this verse in a while. For this is the firstborn, but put thy right hand upon his head. And then in verse 19, his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he. So you see the concept there of the first and the last, how those who desire to be first They think the nation of Israel, for example, that I think is a very good example. They think that they are the chosen people. We're the first. We're the people of God. We're Israel. We were offered the land of Canaan, you know. But truly, what does the Bible say about Israel? Ultimately, no, they become last. All right, so they think that they're first. They think somehow they have a relationship with God, even though they don't. Most of them, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, very self-righteous. But in reality, God has brought judgment on them. In Matthew 22, verse 14, again, for many are called, but few are chosen. So there it is. When we put all these verses together, there is no way that I can see that this Matthew, this parable, Matthew 20, um, that God is talking about two sets of believers, you know, one believer complaining, murmuring against Christ. How can the believers do that? But yet, this is the interpretation. It appears, for the most part. I think probably Mr. Camping might have come to the same conclusion, right? But again, if you think about these verses carefully, no, it's going back to the wheat and tares, the first and the last. They agree. The corporate church has a mandate. Now, keep in mind. Remember, I've said many times, God looks at the whole body as if it is saved, right? As if it is saved. God, you know, he starts out with the premise that the corporate body is saved, and then there are those who fall away. They were never saved. They're part of the corporate body, just like the nation of Israel coming out of Egypt. God cared for them corporately, but then came the time of the separation of wheat and tares. So the agreement is that, okay, you're gonna go and then you're gonna, you know, the laborers are going out, but every man is going to receive a penny. Every man is going to receive according to according as his work shall be. But what does the rest of the Bible tell us? Well, there are those who uh, come to redemption in Christ, yet there are others who come under the judgment of God. They receive the reward of unrighteousness, a just recompense of reward according to their works. Now, their works, ultimately, we know it is the work of God. God had the whole corporate body under his wrath from the beginning, but as far as the separation of wheat and tares, we begin to see how these parables would come into play. All right, so the summary here, I just wrote something down. Let me read this paragraph. The parable of Matthew 20 appears to be showing that the corporate church was tasked with bringing the gospel and to receive in exchange a penny. And that penny is a tribute, it is money, it is Christ. However, God brings judgment to the unsaved body, and they murmur against him, supposing they were first and therefore should be saved. But God repays it with the reward of unrighteousness, that is the judgment side of Christ, thus fulfilling the Bible's principle that those who desire to be first, that's the corporate church, shall be last, and the last, the elect, the believers, they end up being first. As I said before, 3 studies here. I'll post them a little later on in the chat. First estate, money, and last place. All right. Okay. Any questions? Any questions on some of these verses? So when I post the study, I'll post the verses also, and hopefully you might be able to see.
You're gonna have this recorded for later.
Yeah. All right. So let me turn off the recorder for now. Yeah, I was recording this section because I'll put the study up on the Berean Studies site.